This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 251 of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner. We are in Greeley, Colorado, right before the start of the WeldWorks Invitational, although people won't hear it. It'll be a few weeks after this when they finally hear it. Joining me is Nick Panchamé of Holmes and Smooj. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited about doing the Smooj cast today. I can't tell you how excited I am about this. Of course, those who read Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine know that Smooj was one of our beers of the year last year. Whether it's a beer or not and should be included in that, I'll leave to other people to argue about on the internet. I don't really care. We thought it was fantastic. Our team loves it and have enjoyed drinking this. It's certainly its own thing and has carved out its own space in this world of beverages. You approach it from a pretty crafty perspective. You're not making a ton of it. You approach it, you're brewing it or making it, producing Smooj in this way that builds a incredibly flavorful product. At the same time, you guys brew all across the spectrum. You brew everything from mixed culture, coolshipped beers, sour beers. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to go if you look at that entire breadth of beers that Holmes and Smooj now make together. We're going to talk about some of those things. We're definitely going to talk about fruited hard seltzer, but we'll also talk about some other beers along the way just to maintain your brewing credibility, Nick. Before we do that, for nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. G&D stands above the rest as the only chiller manufacturer that engineers your glycol piping for free. G&D also stands alone as the only chiller manufacturer with an in-house team of installers and engineers with 30 years of real-world field labor experience in breweries, wineries, and distilleries. Contact the Total Glycol System Design experts today at gdchillers.com. Also, are you ready to brew like a pro? ProBrew has the equipment, systems, and technology to take your brewery to the next level. Check out www.probrew.com for info on patented ProCarb inline carbonation technology, ProFill rotary filling and seaming can fillers, the Alchemator inline alcohol separation system, 7 to 50 barrel brew houses, and more. ProBrew, a subsidiary of Technoblend, is now a ProMock brand, offers the craft beer industry innovative solutions to help you brew like a pro. Go to www.probrew.com for more info. Nick, we normally kick off the podcast with a little bit of background. Tell me about yours.
Yeah, I'm from New Jersey originally, born and raised in New Jersey, like 12 miles outside of New York City. Grew up out there. I went to culinary school. I was really, really into the mindset that I was going to be a chef coming out of high school.
Yeah.
And that was right around the time where things were
but
really...
You knew that coming out of high school that was going to be the thing.
Yeah, I had an uncle that owned a deli and a catering business, so I started working with them, and I thought this could be a thing. I was a terrible student, so I was like, this might be something I could actually fall into. And that was right around the time like Anthony Bourdain was already popular, really getting popular, but like the food scene in America was kind of changing and getting cooler, and chefs kind of had a celebrity, and I was just really into that. So I went to Johnson and Wales University in Providence, Rhode Island, and went there for culinary arts and food service management. And I met a buddy who was into home brewing with his dad. So I kind of got into craft beer and thought I might try to intern in college. And I graduated in 2008. So pretty much the height of the recession. It's not a good time to graduate college.
Right.
And the only job that I could see myself taking and be able to pay these massive college loans was a corporate dining company, basically specifically for college dining. So like companies would bid and win a bid to provide food service for college,
like an Aramark kind of.
Exactly. Yeah. It was Cisco, I think.
Cisco. Sure. Yeah. Sure.
So I worked at St. John's University in Queens.
Queens. It's a fantastic borough.
Yeah. So I used to drive.
I spent 10 years living in Queens. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I used to drive from New Jersey to Queens and back every day.
Oh my God.
So just an enormous amount of money spent just to get to work.
That's absurd.
Yeah. And traffic and all that. And as you can imagine, was a pretty miserable job if you were like in the mindset that you wanted to do something really creative and culinary minded. It was the worst, and I I didn't enjoy my time doing that. And then finally, I just got laid off at some point, and I was like, in my mind, I had already made up my mind, like I'm just gonna get into brewing because I'd been home brewing that throughout that job. They put me on the night shift, so like there was like a store for college kids to go till 4 a.m. to buy candy when they were high. So I would just sit in the office and read home brewing books.
Oh, hey,
and
perfect.
Just spent all my time doing that.
Yeah.
So once I got laid off, I just like made up my mind, like this is what I'm going to do. Doesn't matter. I'd gotten good job offers once I got laid off, and I just didn't take them. And I decided I'm going to go on unemployment, and I did a full-time internship at a brewery in New Jersey called Cricket Hill. Who they just basically they do lager, they do ales too, but lager was their big thing. And they'd been around for a long time, very traditional. And they just were taking a bunch of full-time unpaid interns as like to help get stuff done there, which now
those heady days of brewing back then. Sure.
Right. Exactly. So like at the time,
unpaid people in the brew house. Sure.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That makes sense.
But honestly, right now, probably wouldn't be accepted so much. But back then I was like, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. Like so I worked for them 4 months, not getting paid, nothing. And then I was able to snag a job at a little brew pub in New York City called 508 Gastro Brewery. They were open back in the day. They're not around anymore. But I worked there for a year. It was a restaurant that then got a brewer license. They set up the brewery in the basement, nano brewery style. We'd brew down there, very small scale. We'd fill bottles. I'd push carts of bottles down like Manhattan city blocks to a shipping storage place, ride the elevator up and put it into a shipping container and do that like 3 times to like get a batch of beer over there. It was an awesome experience though. It was right when craft beer was really starting to take off in New York City. I got to pour at like the first New York City Brewers Guild.
What year was that?
I mean, that must have been 2010, 2011.
Sure. I left in 2010 to move out to Colorado, and it's like, I think within a year, the entire city looked different for beer.
It was crazy.
It just happened like overnight.
Yeah.
All of a sudden there were new breweries, like literally a half a block from our old apartment in Long Island City. Like, where were you for the last 10 years when I lived here? Yeah.
But it's in that Northeast area. It's like crazy, the transition. Like, when I left New Jersey, there was 8 breweries, and now, I mean, there's tons of breweries. This is like right before Other Half opened and a bunch of those breweries. So after a year at 508 Gastro Brewery, I had gotten a job offer to work at Right Brain Brewery in Traverse City, Michigan. And I never really lived in Michigan or really spent too much time there, but they were the only one that were answering my emails. So, so I moved to Traverse City.
Huh. Okay.
And that was it. And then I was a brewer there for a few months and then just got moved to the head brewer position there for shy of 4 years, living in Traverse City, which Traverse City is like a vacation town. I mean, if you're familiar, in northwest Michigan. It's actually like a beach town, which you don't really think of when you think of the Midwest, but they were like right on Lake Michigan. And I lived there for 4 years and brewed there. And then I connected with Tommy, the owner of Holmes, through Pro Brewer.
Wow.
He had posted for a job, and I kind of, in my mind, I was like, I'm going to get hit 3 years or exactly at Right Brain, and then I'm going to start looking for another thing. I just wanted to grow and try other things. And within 20 minutes of me applying, he called me, and we talked for like a few hours on the phone, and then just like consistently was talking until the brewery finally, we waited till we purchased the property before I actually moved down and started working. So that was kind of this leading up to Holmes. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Holmes, and I'm curious about this because you got to launch the brewery together, which means the production, the beers that you make, the vision for this is a shared vision.
Yeah.
And that's always fascinating to me to kind of dive into that creative process and how you decide to be a brewery. Before we do that, supply chain challenges are here to stay for a while, so why not trust the experts to handle freight for your ingredients? Old Orchard has partnered with a leading logistics firm in the craft beverage industry to transport your craft concentrate blends. When you order 2 pails or more of concentrate from Old Orchard, you qualify for freight quotes from various carriers and can stay up to date on the status of your shipment. To get started on a freight quote for craft concentrates today, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. Also looking for good lager yeast? Fermentis, the obvious choice for beverage fermentation, provides brewers large and small with the most complete portfolio of dry lager yeast available anywhere. To learn more about how Fermentis can improve the quality of your fermentation and for the latest on their exciting new product releases, visit fermentis.com. So Nick, talk to me about the early formative stage of homes. This is again mid-20 teens now. You all are looking to launch a new brewery in what would then be a more crowded market. It wasn't as empty as it would have been 4 years ago when you started at your other brewery in Traverse City. So what did that creative process look like? How did you all determine a road to take and how to build out a product strategy around that?
Yeah, we tried to be really intentional early on before the brewery opened to be testing out recipe development with.
Is Tommy a brewer?
No. So Tommy came from home healthcare. Actually, he was working with his brother before that. He's from Michigan originally.
Sure.
Moved away from Michigan for a while and then came back to go to U of M, University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And then him and his brother started a home healthcare company, and he joined the team. And then I think kind of had a yearning to do something and go out on his own, and something that he can bring people together. Definitely a big craft beer fan, but wanted to go a direction that was not just to open a business to make money, much more of a community feel.
But this is a leap of faith then for you, because you are leaving an existing established brewery with a track record.
Yeah.
You're going to create a brand new business with somebody who is not currently operating a craft beer business. You're diving right in.
Yeah, 100%. I think for me, my skill set is recipe development. I'm not necessarily the most engineering or science-based brewer. We've hired staff that are fantastic at that to help with that. But I really like the recipe development part of it. So I really wanted to get in on the ground level with the brewery and not come in and be brewing other people's beers. So that was a big goal of mine. And that's kind of one of the things I really liked. I really hit it off with Tommy, but he wanted somebody that was passionate, that wanted to start something, had ideas. He wasn't going to come in and push, we've got to brew an ESB, we've got to brew this or that. And I really actually liked that dynamic. I don't know that it would have been the same situation if he was a veteran craft beer guy coming into it. Obviously he still has tons of input. He's super savvy when it comes to that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was a little bit of a leap of faith, but also this is perfect. And not being from Michigan originally, another one of my things, no offense to people from Michigan, there's only a few cities that I would consider living in Michigan at that time. Mm-hmm. And Ann Arbor was definitely one of them. So I was this is kind of a perfect scenario for me.
Yeah. So. Get to move away from vacation town into a more year-round city. And
yeah. Traverse City was really cool too. I will say that's a great city.
Yeah.
They just get an enormous amount of snow, and I can't deal with it.
Sure. No, and then there's that. I don't know if what your relationship status was at that point, but it's something I always think about. There was a point where I had applied for a job years ago when I lived in New York, out in Carbondale, Colorado. And, it was a town of 10,000 people.
Yeah.
If you were young and single, they kept losing employees because male or female, if you were single, the dating pool is really, really small.
Yeah.
So in a place like that, that's more, seasonal or vacation oriented, that it just tends to there are other limiting factors that are around social scenarios and whatnot. So
for sure. And then it's super intense in the summer with work, and then very slow in the winter. There's a lot of ebbs and flows. But so what we did was we were really intentional about recipe development. I brewed out of Tommy's garage for a full year before we got open.
Really?
Yeah. And he's got a very good network of friends.
He brought you on and paid you.
Yeah.
The business paid you for a year before you all opened.
Yeah. He was basically I want to be able to buy the building first before I tell you to move down here and quit your job and all that, which is, fair enough.
Sure.
So as soon as he closed on the building, he's like, all right, it's time to go. There was literally if you've been to the brew pub before, there's a brew pub, a parking lot, and then a little house in the parking lot, basically, it's like a weird setup, but the house is part of the property. So hence
the name, right?
Yeah. It's a 2-family home. And I lived upstairs in a tiny little apartment while we were trying to get this thing open.
Yeah.
But he has a really good network of friends, and he had a poker night every single Tuesday, and we would get a decent amount of people showing up to his house, sometimes up to 20, 25 people every week. So we had
You're beta testing beer all the time.
That's it. It was a kegerator. We had a Google Doc. You could have a beer under the condition that you have to rate it no matter what. You have to give feedback. Like there's no way around that. So every week I had a living document with rating and feedback on every beer that we were brewing up until we opened. So that was really helpful in getting that started.
So then what did the initial product strategy look like? Of course, lots of breweries opening in that time frame have since pivoted to different product strategies or realized that maybe this is a little more limited than I thought it would be. What did it look like then? What does it look like now?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really fun time to get into the industry, especially in Michigan.
It seems weird to be like nostalgically looking back on 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah.
It seems kind of early to be looking back in that way. But having said that, a lot has changed in that time.
Craft beer in general in the past decade has changed so much so fast. So 5 years, I mean, we just hit our 5-year mark, and it's crazy how different it is from then to now.
Yeah.
But coming into it, New England IPA was starting. It was already obviously a pretty big thing on the East Coast, but it was starting to spread. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't really much New England IPA in Michigan. We were big fans of it. I came from the East Coast, and we had done some traveling to talk to brewers and explore. And we did a bunch of East Coast stuff. So we, the mindset was we were going to do sour beer and hoppy beer early on. Those were the two things. I kind of pushed to have a few options, and I think this is still the brew pub 90s mentality I had, where you got to have something for everybody. There should be a stout, there should be an ESB, and those styles are obviously great, but we pushed for sours and IPAs. We didn't, we wanted to do mixed culture sour. That was something we were really passionate about, but that obviously takes a ton of time.
Right.
So we opened up with kettle sours as an option, and then we realized in the first 2 weeks, we had 4 beers left because we just really didn't have a lot of brewing space. It was 3 10-barrel tanks and a 20-barrel tank, and we had a 10-barrel brew house. So we were, I was trying to keep the ESB on and the stout on, and then we were brewing these IPAs. The IPAs and the fruited sours would get drank, and then people would hear about those styles of beer, drive in from Ohio or Indiana, and there's an ESB. And
that's all that's left.
A not great stout, and it's just which I could see the frustration there.
Yeah.
So Tommy and I kind of had to have a come to Jesus, because I was pushing we have to have all these styles, and he's like, let's just brew the beers that people are coming here for.
Right.
So for a long time, we basically just had hoppy beer, fruited sour beer. We do a beer called King Cold Brew, which is an imperial cream ale that we add coffee grinds direct, so it's a lighter colored coffee beer. And that was kind of it. It was just that. And then we were able to start to come out with some mixed culture sour stuff. We had spent some time out in Oregon at Cascade and really loved what they were doing. So we kind of did that, brew a clean beer and then long age in oak with bacteria, long developed souring. The building we're in is a Culligan Water building from the 40s. And they built these cast cement block rooms underground that they would fill with water and salt, because they would use saltwater solution to clean your home water filters. So they pump them on a truck. So we converted those into a space that you could walk down, because there was no people were not supposed to be in it, because it was just for that. Right. So we put stairs in, floor drains in, and then just had barrels of that type of sour down there. And then also still started doing just straight up mixed culture Solera. We had a 60 barrel that we do Solera mixed culture sour in. Coolshipped beers came in, and then just blended barrel mixed culture sour as well. And then all the way up until now, we have a line of, we bought a 40 barrel fooder from Fooder Crafters, and just do fooder lagers in that. So we've got a line of lagers, We've branched out. We didn't want to touch stout for a while. Early on, we had a few stouts that went on tap that, like I said, I'm okay saying it now, we're kind of subpar, so we just like got away from it. And then we talked more and more about barrel-aged stouts, and me having like a culinary background, I was confident it was something we could do well because the adjunct part of it was something I'm familiar with. Like these are real tangible ingredients, vanilla or nuts or whatever. Like I can really get a handle on that type of thing. So we started releasing barrel-aged stouts right at the end of 2019. And those are like more limited, not around all the time, but we've done pretty well with those. So,
well, how did Smooj come to be? Tell me the Smooj origin story. Because I'm fascinated by this. Like, I mean, how do you even start conceiving of the existence of a 300-ish calorie hard seltzer that looks like a fruit smoothie? It didn't exist in the world, and then the entire market there was moving towards very light, low cal, dry, essenced, kind of approach to hard seltzer. And you guys just went 180 degrees in the other direction and said, we're going to blow the flavor out on this and make something. Talk to me about the early days of Smooj and how that whole thing came to be.
Yeah, I think when I really think about it, it's the very big upside of being small and nimble as a brewery early on. Seltzer obviously had become this thing that was more and more and more popular. Craft breweries started doing seltzer, but a lot of it was...
they also started hating on a lot of seltzer at the same time. Maybe more hate than makers, in those earlier days.
For sure. And I mean, at this point, I understand why people like seltzer. Like, if you're not looking for a lot of calories, and a lot of people have gluten intolerance now or celiac. So, I understand the move towards it. But a lot of people were getting into it. We knew, like, if we're going to do this, we would really like to do it differently. That's kind of the thing with homes. Like, we're not necessarily brewing the classic styles to style. I mean, I would go as far as say we just don't do that. And I love classic styles, but if we're going to do it, I want it to be more interesting and a different take on it. And we've always been pretty open-minded to gluten-free stuff. At our brew pub, we got licensed to sell alcohol, our liquor, and white wine, and Tommy's wife has celiac, so we're pretty open-minded to people who don't drink beer, and we wanted to include everybody.
My younger son has celiac, and I'm in the same boat with that. I am a big fan of non-gluten based products that can still live in this craft world that we're in.
Yeah, and that's a big thing with our brew pub too. Like we wanted to be able to attract. If we were going to be community minded, it was to try to attract every kind of person. If you can't drink, if you're out with a group of friends and one of them has celiacs or whatever, you're probably going to pick a place that caters to that. So we wanted to make sure we could do that.
And when it's your own wife, like, I mean, you clearly want to build a place, your business, your brewery that, your own wife can go enjoy herself at too.
Yeah, for sure. So we were just thinking, we knew that in craft beer, heavily fruited, mostly sour, kettle sour beer was just really a thing that was becoming really, really popular. It was a style we were doing a lot of and really enjoying. Again, it's like, I think it is that culinary minded part. It's like, how can we use different adjunct outside ingredients to make something really fun and interesting? But it just wasn't being done in seltzer. And you would have thought at the time, like, well, you can't do that because people are drinking seltzer for a specific reason. It's low calorie, which is definitely true. But we took this like inside baseball, nerdy craft beer thing that most people don't really even know about, and wanted to put it into a product that is the kind of the opposite of that. It's more large scale, as friendly as possible to as many people as possible. Like, combine those two concepts. Tommy had been pushing for a while, like, we should try a seltzer. And I think I was one of those brewers that you were talking about pretty early on. I was like, I don't want to do this shit. Like, and I was definitely very resistant to it, but like, sometimes you got to get over yourself to like find a new way of doing things. So I'm very happy to admit that I was one of those people, but like, being closed-minded is not going to help. So we worked with Jacob Russell-Meyer, who's one of our brewers at the time. He's very engineer-minded, and I think was really good at finding a way to make it work. I think I was a little bit more on the recipe development. What ingredients could we use? What like what flavors combinations could we use. And then the original idea was Tommy really being like, we do these heavy fruited beers. I think it would work really well in seltzer as well. So it's like a combination of the three of us that kind of came together. And I think the first thing we put together may have been like just on a trial, like not even making a production batch or all. Maybe it was like strawberry banana or the pina colada. It was one of those two, I think. And we tried and I was like, oh shit, this is probably something. And then we had a small like hop torpedo, basically. It holds 90 gallons. We filled that with base seltzer that we had fermented, in an unjacketed container, just like very loosey goosey. Added fruit, put it into a walk-in. It had a little like carb stone that was tri-clamped onto it. We carbonated it in the walk-in, ran it through our, we have a wild goose canning line, had a bunch of waste, got a very small amount of it.
Right.
And then, just kind of released it without much fanfare. Didn't tell people we were doing a seltzer, just kind of released it. The first time we released it was under Troubadour. And then within like 30 minutes, we're like, we got to change Troubadour. That's not a name we can use.
Yeah, no.
So Troubadour, Smooj. And I think at first Troubadour might have been a name we were going to use more. And then we're like, just make it Smooj. And that's kind of how it progressed. It was just like people got a handle of it. And I was like, this is crazy. So we just kept doing it.
What year was that?
That was the summer. It was June of 2020, I want to say.
So you released Smooj then in the midst of pandemic, and it went into cans. Obviously, it was harder to do on premise at that point.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a huge part of why Smooj ever happened. I think if the pandemic didn't happen, Smooj would not have existed. It was like, yeah, we didn't have people. We're not a distributing brewery. We only sell out of our locations.
Yeah.
So I think it was just like what's a creative thing we can to get people's attention and interest with all the other breweries that are trying to do the same thing we're doing. And yeah, we had just gotten a canning line. We got a canning line in February of 2020. So like right before things got crazy.
Wow.
I was so lucky.
Wow.
It was incredibly lucky because we were using mobile canning and they were shut down for a while once it started. So we would have been in a lot of trouble if that didn't happen.
Yikes. It's weird to hear like Society in San Diego, the same thing happened where they had their larger scale production canning line already, like it was weeks away from being commissioned. And when that whole thing, there's just some of those dodging a bullet stories right there. So you guys had a little bit of extra time in your hands. It's funny because when we look back now 2 years ago to 2020, number one, American brewers got way better at brewing lagers through the pandemic because all of a sudden you had time and some tank space, especially if you were a smaller brewer, and some could put some time, dedicate stuff because tanks were just not they didn't need to be constantly filled for that churn of summer business, unfortunately. But you all had time to then play around with making hard seltzer. Yeah, for sure. That's when we started working on lagers as well. We kept busy enough to really keep, the entire brewing staff on hand and started working through it was creating a new category of alcohol. So there's not a lot of information on how to make heavily fruited seltzer. I mean, there's no information out there. And obviously there's a lot of crossover with beer and stuff. So we just started working through the process and still working on it. Sure. So since that first batch, you've clearly had, you've put more work into it. Yeah. More iteration. Yeah. Talk to me about, let's maybe start with, at the very bottom of building a seltzer base for this. Clearly you want to use, a neutral fermenting or use a process to strip out a lot of the fermentation flavor for that to get something that's super neutral. What does that fermentation look like for you all on this? Yeah, as silly as some people might think, like this is actually a really hard product to make. It's super, super cellar heavy. It's really all about cellar side. I imagine like between yeast nutrition and, trying to get it clean. I mean, before you layer fruit in, like that's it. pH, pH acts very differently than beer during fermentation. Yeah. Nutrients. You're starting with water and sugar. There's nothing there. So you really have to be super intentional about that. And then we mess around with the water profile a lot like we would with beer. What sugar do you use for a base? That we use dextrose. Dextrose, yeah. I don't know that that's going to be a forever thing. The prices of dextrose are going up, but probably the price of every sugar is going up at this point. Sure.
I think we're open.
There's other reasons to have dextrose in your brew house,
right? Yeah, exactly. And with sugar, I mean, seltzer, it's a cleaner fermentation, so there's probably more room to switch up what sugar you want to use at any given point.
Right.
So we're brewing a base seltzer to a certain ABV. We're blending in fruit to get to our final ABV, and then
is there a specific yeast that you use for this?
I'm trying to think of the yeast off. It's a dry yeast that we're using. Yeah, it's not something we're reusing just because that fermentation is pretty rough.
Yeah.
On the yeast, I don't know off the top of my head what yeast we
Fair
use.
Enough.
That fermentation is pretty rough on the yeast. It's not something worth reusing or cropping. And we do a lot of propagation. That's the other cool part about Smooj. It's allowed us to spend money on products, equipment, and people that we wouldn't have been able to do if it was just home. So Jen is our lab manager. We hired her on. She's growing all of our brewers yeast from a slant to a propagation pitch every single time. We've got tons of equipment, salometer, PCR machine, and all that. So that's another cool part about having that program as well. But yeah, we're blending in fruit to get to the ABV we need. You got to make sure that it's fully incorporated. We sell the cans to be sold up. They're upside down when they're in the package, so that you're forced to flip it back over because there is settling. We don't use any extract. There's no flavor extract at all. It's all real fruit. When we use vanilla in a product, it's actual Madagascar vanilla beans. Or if there's spice, it's actual. You get the idea. It's all real ingredients. So you got to make sure that the fruit is kept in suspension while packaging it, so that the first cans aren't mud and then the last cans are just regular juice. And that's kind of start to finish. And then depending on the fruit, it's not a one size fits all.
Maybe back up just a hair there. You're brewing a higher ABV, sugar fermentation that you then, can dilute down, equal, based on the math that you do with the fruit. Yeah. And then, fruit comes in. Are using a puree. And now I imagine there's some proprietary stuff here. If you can't talk about anything, then I understand. You got to keep some secrets to yourself.
Right. Well, it's dependent on the ingredient too. I mean, not so much with fruit, but like if we're using whole ingredients, there's some steeping that has to happen. Obviously you don't want that whole ingredient to end up in a can.
Right.
Fruit puree, I don't think there's any secret in there. We have to keep, it has to be a liquid, obviously, to be in the can and stay in solution. As far as like aseptic or non-aseptic, I think there's always room to try different things on that. Sometimes there's just products that don't do well as aseptic fruit. I think peach is a good example. We use peach a lot in aseptic fruit, but like you do cook out flavor no matter what when you're getting something up to temperature like that. So like there's options to use a non-aseptic ingredient that tastes better, then we're definitely going to consider that. But yeah, we're
interesting. So you'll just basically choose which form, aseptic or non-aseptic or puree, just based on
if it makes sense for that specific flavor that we're doing. Yeah, but you can do that for sure. Yeah.
With all this fruit, you have to then with that base make sure that there's no yeast left in there. Or are you pasteurizing further down in the process to make sure that something will come out of it?
Yeah, I would say there's like multiple steps that we're taking because it's such a sensitive product.
Right. I just skipped back to the end where.
No. I mean, it's a good question. And as like a consumer, you'd probably want to know, is this a shelf stable item? That we're taking a ton of steps. And I would say our lab manager, most of her job is spent making sure before this product goes out, is it going to be shelf stable? Is it ready? And we've found that it is. It's just so much work and effort and a thought and emotion that goes into like the stress of figuring out how we do this. But it's a ton of different steps to get us to that point where we're feeling good about sending that product out.
Sure. I won't push too much more on how you're you're stabilizing that. That's an interesting one. Talk to me about flavor development. From a creative standpoint, you guys have hung your hats really on strawberry, banana, and pina colada as the two primary flavors from Smooj, and have managed to keep those pretty consistent through all of this. But then also throw out additional flavors. Talk to me about that flavor creation process. And then as you are then evaluating sources of ingredients, for these things, different kinds of fruit, what that process then looks like for you. What is that creative process for you?
Yeah, I think that's something that is a little unique to this brand that I actually really, really like and appreciate that we do. As we're growing it, we're in 12 states at this point. So as we're growing it, there's still a ton of, if not most of our emphasis on keeping this thing exciting is making sure that we are doing like small scale releases that you can only get at our tap room in Ann Arbor and still be out in distribution, in all these different states. Like we don't plan on getting rid of that. That's kind of like our farm program for what's going to make it to the big leagues is like either a mainstay, which is right now is pina colada, strawberry banana, and tropical trip, or maybe just a seasonal, which sticks around for a few months. Like we do apple pie Smooj, or our distro lab drop, which is we do it once. It's maybe 10, 13 pallets get spread out across all of our accounts across the country. So we use that small scale, we call it Smooj Lab program that we do maybe like 40 to 70 cases. We shoot it out. They're called like drip drop. We do on social media. It's like a time thing. It'll say drip, and then a half hour later it's drip drip, and then after the course of 2 hours we've warned people this is coming, and then this is what it is. It'll usually sell out online and people come and pick it up. So we were really, really intentional about making sure that we're experimenting. I meet weekly with a few of my employees. These are the new ideas we have. This is the thing we tried last week. We changed this amount of vanilla in it, this amount of strawberry or whatever. And there's a ton of thought and effort put into constantly having something that we can drop. In an ideal world, we're dropping a Smooj Lab every 2 weeks. We definitely miss weeks because in the summer when production is really ramped up, it's hard to get stuff out as often, but super, super intentional about having those small releases so that our local community feels excited and still bought in on like this thing we're doing. But then also like, this turned out really good. We can source these ingredients easily every year. Let's move it up to a distro lab. That did really well. It feels like it'd be a good release for the winter. Let's do a seasonal release with it this year. And then if it really makes sense, then maybe it's a mainstay that we'll have all the time.
So it sounds to me like, ideas come from various members of the team that are all pushing on this, or, they bring flavor ideas or ingredient ideas to the table.
For sure. We do get the staff involved. I'm the head brewer of Homes and the head of operations for Smooj, but for Smooj, besides managing folks, really a big part of my job is supposed to be the flavor development side of it. But I'm not taking credit for it. There's just our staff is awesome, and they're really throwing a lot of ideas.
Where do your flavor ideas come from? I mean, I think figuring that out and finding that source of inspiration, and then where do those ideas come from, and what is the process of iterating and dialing those in then look like before they end up in a product, or during that addition, if you are tasting along the way, trying to get it to what you think it can be in a finished product before you release it?
Yeah, sometimes it's like marketing down, like, hey, in the fall, it'd be cool if we can do something kind of desserty, something that feels warmer, and we'll mess around with like the first thing we'll think of, pineapple upside down cake. How do we make pineapple upside down cake in a way that's not corny or cheesy, that actually tastes like pineapple upside down cake? And we're breaking down that food item to be like, how do we make it taste like cake? How do we get caramelized pineapple flavor? There's a little cherry that sits on it. Like, we can add cherry, but not too much. It shouldn't overwhelm it. And that's a lot of times that's how it starts. We'll take an existing thing like a painkiller cocktail. How do we do all those things, but in a Smooj way,
because you've already set the groundwork that you're not going to use artificial flavors or extracts. You're going to try to do this in the most natural and real way that you can.
Yeah, and I think that's another selling point of the product. Like, if we can stick to that, that's something that I think people really appreciate about it. But a lot of times it's just thinking of a thing that already exists and how can we do it in a cool way. We just released cherry cola Smooj a few weeks ago, and it legitimately tastes like cherry cola. Like, I don't think, like, if you think about it or fish for it, it's not like, it just tastes like cherry cola. And there's no cola, like, we didn't use any weird Coca-Cola powder or whatever. It's all just fruit. So it's just like super talented, people that are helping us out with this, that are figuring out a combination of these ingredients.
Cola flavor out of just fruit.
We looked up like what is cola? Obviously it's a secret recipe, but we know that like lemon and lime and dark fruit or dark flavor, so like molasses, lemon, lime, and dark flavor kind of is what Coca-Cola is. So, we list all the ingredients. There's lemon, there's lime. We use a little bit of plum because that's like a dark fruit flavor. We use cherry, obviously. And vanilla is a big part of Coca-Cola. And Coke is sweet. I mean, soda is very, very sweet. So we try to get the sugar level up. And it just worked out really, really well.
That brings me to another. I think that's fascinating, and trying to construct or reverse engineer flavors out of a palette of ingredients that you're into. But mentioning sweetness also gets me thinking about acidity. So I want to talk about figuring out sweetness, both residual sugar level and acidity in these to help heighten that fruit experience, because I think that is another big piece of what makes yours in particular really pop. Before we do that, you love brewing podcasts, right? The Brew Deck podcast from our friends at Country Malt Group is worth adding to your regular podcast lineup. They cover topics from selecting and sourcing raw materials to innovative new products, plus entertaining stories and insights. The Brew Deck podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe today. Also, as craft beer's most trusted point-of-sale system arrived as the mobile all-in-one solution you need to decrease service friction and increase guest satisfaction. With a full suite of craft-specific features, no contracts, and no monthly fees, Arrived provides the necessary tools to help your brewery grow. Go to arrived.com/CBB to set up a free customized demo. That's Arrived, ARRYVED.com/CBB. Remember, there is no I in Arrived. So let's talk about that piece of say pH or titratable acidity. I don't, however you choose to measure that kind of thing, which certainly is something that you all dialed into with sour beer before that, and then sugar and how those things, and then also vanilla, because I keep hearing you talk about vanilla. And I think that's, as we've talked to on the podcast with folks like Brett Coleman Baker from Urban Artifact. I mean, it becomes that, even Troy Casey for that matter, vanilla is that kind of secret, that little piece that makes fruit taste even more like fruit. So let's talk about each one of those things. Do are there specific pH areas where you like for this to be, to kind of capture that punchiness of fruit? I mean, people expect fruit to have some amount of that acidity. Does it vary based on what that fruit is, or do you just have some broader goals around these things?
Yeah, it definitely varies based on the fruit. I think we usually stay very low 4, sub 4 range. We're not necessarily like shooting for a pH. It's usually always about taste for us.
Yeah.
But it's dependent on fruit for sure. Some stuff is just more acidic, but that's just the nature of adding so much fruit to this stuff. Like the pH is going to be really low, and it doesn't necessarily come off as super acidic. Like I think a lot of soda is like crazy acidic.
It's crazy acidic.
Right.
Yeah.
But it doesn't read that way because you're counterbalancing it with sugar,
sure.
Right? That's kind of the big thing.
Some of it's the types of acids they're using, but I mean, you can get like Coke. I mean, it's down. I mean, like 2.5 range on pH. Like some of these are just absolutely insane, but they've got so much sugar that you just don't perceive them as sour.
Right. I mean, that's lemonade basically, right? Like no one's drinking pitchers of lemon juice, but if you add a bunch of sugar to it, it tastes great. Like it's a similar concept.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of sugar, so, is there a typical goal for that? Or is that also more fruit driven depending on where your ingredient is on that?
Definitely. Yeah. More fruit driven. We're never just adding straight sugar to a post fermented thing. So it's really about flavor. I mean, we definitely taste things and be like, the sweetness can come up. Let's add this fruit to compensate for that. But we also are like mindful that pina colada, if anybody's had it before, is a pretty sweet product. So like we're not trying to blow it out every single time like that. We do try to fit in other items that are like a lower sugar level that still tastes really good. The idea here is not to just make everything super sugary, so everybody's going to love it. Like we're trying to balance both of those things.
I totally agree with you, and especially with pina colada. I mean, there's a little bit of a spicy, character that plays against. I mean, and it should be that's normal in a pina colada.
Yeah,
and pineapple itself has some of that like earthy spiciness.
Yeah,
that plays against the fruit character there.
Yeah.
Is there anything in particular that you do to kind of heighten that balance? I thought it was really fascinating. There wasn't like as you drink it.
Yeah,
it's intentionally more balanced than some people might want to or be able to appreciate if they're not trying to tear apart the flavor.
Yeah, I mean it's like that lemonade idea. Like pina colada has pineapple and key lime in it, both very, very acidic things. So we do counterbalance that with the coconut product that we use to kind of find a middle ground. And I think it also it almost has like an umami thing to it that is hard to explain. It's not savory, but it's not just straight up sweet. That pina colada was one of the ones we tried really early on. And we were trying to figure out like the fruit dosing rate. And we had like a lower fruit dosing and a higher fruit dosing. And it's like, this isn't even a conversation. Like the more fruit tastes substantially better, because I think it just like it is a bit sweet. It's a sweet product, but it feels right for what that is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So how much is too much? I mean, you all imagine are trying to find that limit of just where either you see a declining return and the more you add, you've hit maximum saturation, you can't get more in versus,
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I think I'm pretty sensitive to really sweet stuff. I remember like as a kid, we'd go trick-or-treating for Halloween and I would have that bag of candy like 6 months. It'd be like summer and I still had candy from Halloween. So like it just makes me, I feel gross immediately after.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sensitive to getting to a point, I think, where it's just like, this is too much. And it's just us, checking ourselves. And just like, in the early days of homes when we were getting people to try stuff, when we're blending product and blending fruit before we decide to actually make a production batch of it, a lot of people I'm handing glasses to a lot of people and saying like, taste this and tell me what you think on our staff. So we're pretty intentional about making sure like we get some feedback. It can't just be one person, because no matter how great you are at, tasting through stuff, you're going to find something really good and everyone else is gonna be like, I don't know what you're talking about. This is not very good. So like we're trying to get other employees' involvement in that way.
Is there a flavor you've done over the last year that you may not have expected to like as much as you did, that kind of caught you off guard or was unexpected or just
yeah, that's a good question.
Exciting.
Actually, we've been messing around with a like a banana cream pie type product, and I like banana a lot, but like I tried that for the first time. I was like, this is actually surprisingly really good. We haven't moved on it yet. I think we're considering maybe doing it as a beer instead of a Smooj, which is the other fun part about Smooj Lab.
Banana Smooj, that sounds like it should be another half collab.
Yeah, actually, that's not a bad idea. I have to hit them up. So that one was definitely surprising. And I think we've been messing around with the Mai Tai.
Wild Thai banana Smooj.
Yeah, Jesus, it'd be the most expensive Smooj ever.
Sure.
Wild Thai banana is crazy. There's a few like the cocktail ones that we've tried that I've really been surprised at how much we can make it taste like that cocktail.
All right. Well, we've been talking a whole lot about Smooj, which I thank you. Appreciate.
Yeah, of course.
I love talking about this because I'm a big Smooj fan. Don't tell anyone. Just keep a secret between the two of us.
I will say, like when we're at beer festivals, we just had Nucleate and our guys were out at Green City. The brewers are always coming up behind the booth and just like, can you just give me a can of that? Like it's. I mean, I think a lot of people hated it on first, but with Seltzer, like. There's not a lot of like people out there that are hating on heavily fruited seltzer because there's not a long tradition of, Germans making seltzer.
Sure.
Like you can do whatever you want. It's a wide open category. So we've gotten a lot of brewers that are pretty hyped about it.
It's always a favorite in our office, and we end up with a lot of beer, and most of our staff who gets any beer that is left over from our review process, they get a little jaded on the amount of free beer, but as you would expect, right?
Yeah, of course.
Because it's an unlimited flow, and and so at times I have to cajole people into taking extra beer home just so that it doesn't end up burying us. And but man, when the Smooj arrives in the office, everybody knows. They recognize the packaging. And then I get the questions, well, when are we gonna open the Smooj? When are we gonna open the Smooj? Like, I mean, it's developed a fan base amongst the team in our office, and so they're very excited that we're doing this podcast, the Smooj episode today. But let's change gears. Let's talk about something non-fruited hard seltzer.
Sure.
You all brew all sorts of beers. Again, you mentioned hops and sour beers were the original inspiration or the things you focused on in the earliest days of the brewery. What do you find yourself exploring these days in the world of brewing, and what are the subjects in brewing or styles in brewing that you've been spending more and more of your time focusing on to try to figure out, unlock, or solve?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like I said, we brought on a lot of talented people, so I think they're very open to bring stuff to the table. We've definitely started working on the thiolized fermentation. Phantasm, we're working with YCH. I know you guys were just talking about, I was listening to one of the other podcasts with Joe's. We were talking about the 303 trial blend.
Right.
We're just about to put that in a beer. We're really starting to work through that thiolized fermentation and starting to get a pretty good feel for it. Just like as a fun thing to have in the back of our pocket. A few weeks ago, we brewed a Midwest IPA with the thiolized Chico yeast as like just a fun, especially in Michigan, it's got a lot of like set standards with Two Hearted. People know what to expect from Midwest IPA, but again, what's
the framework of Midwest IPA that everyone understands?
I think
is it just a Centennial IPA?
Centennial, slightly malty IPA, clean fermentation, ABV probably between like 7 and 7.5%. Like the pininess, kind of bitter, not super bitter. I think that's basically it. Maybe not everybody is on board with that, but that's what I think. Okay. And it's like, we're in the Midwest. It'd be fun to do a new version of this. So we did a thiolized version of it, just like playing around with it. So that's something I'm really excited about.
What are the results?
I mean, it was that expected thiolized, like very white wine funk in the aroma with passion fruit and grapefruit. Still got some of that in the fermentation. We kind of messed around with the hopping rates, so it wasn't quite as bitter because we like the lower end of bitterness. But we used some Michigan, we used some Centennial and some Michigan Chinook, which Michigan Chinook is an awesome hop. And I love it. I think it turned out really nice. I think people like expect hazy IPA, New England IPA from us, so they're not necessarily sure what it even is.
Right.
But I really like it. I think we can return to it and do some new versions of it in the near future here.
Super excited about all of this because I've always been a big Nelson Sauvin fan and love the character those bring, and I love that it's now being liberated from from solely that hop appellation down there.
Yeah.
Talk to me about Michigan Chinook. That sounds interesting to me. I mean, and now that you bring it up, having a background making hoppy beers for so long, being in a state like Michigan that also has been growing as a hop producer and has some unique flavors and terroir to those hops. How do you think about those hops and how do you use those hops?
Michigan Chinook and Michigan Copper are the two things we really use exclusively. From we don't use a lot of Michigan hops outside of that. I think the Michigan Copper, that's actually the name. It's Michigan Copper.
Right.
And Chinook just grows it's really pineapple-y here. Like there's definitely a big difference between what's grown on the West Coast and what's grown here. And I've tried to turn on a lot of brewers that we've collabed with from outside of the state to use it. Michigan Copper is very tropical, like kind of like tropical fruit candy, almost like the artificial tropical fruit. The growing seasons here have been a little unstable. We're not, our growers are not super fine-tuned in yet. We've had better years and worse years, but both of those hops we love. Michigan Copper, I try to get in the mix at least once a quarter for release beer because it is just like a fun, unique hop variety. We love both of those.
Yeah. On that hoppy beer front, are there any other approaches that you're really excited about these days?
Yeah. So our biggest thing, and the thing I try to push the most, is just being very open-minded to changing how we do things. And especially we've got that luxury because we're a brew pub, we're not making flagships, putting it out to distribution. So, getting away a little bit from the fermentation hop addition, trying to get that hop burn down, trying to get rid of that hop creep, doing a lot of much later stage dry hop fermentation at fermentation temperatures, cold crashing soon after to, pick up hop flavor, eliminate the hop burn is definitely something we've been paying a lot of attention to. Messing with our water a ton all over the place.
Messing in what way?
Chloride levels for sure. We've gone up to the very high end and come down. Ann Arbor water is not like amazing, but it's not unusable either. So we don't have an RO system. And what we're starting to do now is I think the most useful thing we're doing is getting the beer tested instead of just the water tested, like the final product tested. And that's been super insightful in learning, like actually our chloride levels are substantially higher than we thought they were. So we're kind of messing around with that right now. And then we mix in West Coast. I don't want to ever give up on West Coast IPA. So we're still mixing in those from time to time too. And then with our lagers, we dry hop our lagers quite a bit. And we're trying to really find some fun ways to do that. Lower hopping rates while it's cold. How much time should it spend on the hop? Should we do it in the foeder or in stainless? What varieties work? So a lot of New Zealand stuff in dry hops, just because we like that combination with like a crisp lager profile.
And, it removes that kind of idea that these have to be super traditional approaches to lagers. That, you're liberating from that tradition and, and just taking that approach to it. Talk to me, about that. What, when you're using Southern Hemisphere hops or out of the norm hops, where do they tend to be and how do you tend to use those in lagers? And making these in fooders also, produces this other way of, again, calling these different, separate, current, modern things and not a part of one of those traditions.
Yeah. We work with Freestyle. We contract Motueka, Nelson Sauvin, like a lot of folks do, and Waimea. I just like the soft, kind of funky, tropical. I always kind of think of it as like papaya. Like, papaya can get real funky. Mm-hmm. But obviously with Nelson, the white wine grape, I always describe it as funk. I don't know if people would. It's not funk as in Brett, but like just like that white wine kind of stank.
Sure.
is
along with like a little like almost a like linen like snap. Like a little fresh edge to it as well.
Yeah, we're just liking that in lagers, rice lagers specifically. Like I just in my mind, that's kind of how I try to like visualize how it would taste, and I like the idea of like a very crisp, even like rice or Japanese style lager, which we've done, and dry hopping it with some kind of New Zealand hop at the end. I like the combination of those flavors. That's another fun thing. We're trying to find some interesting grains, so like not just rice, but we found a place that will malt Carolina Gold, which is an heirloom variety down in the Carolinas, brought over, from Africa when slaves were brought to the United States. And it's a rice that has been held on in very small farms throughout, decades of farmers kind of picking the type of rice that's going to grow best and get the biggest yield. And then Carolina Gold started making a comeback with a lot of chefs in the United States. And then I was like just extremely excited to find a place that would malt it. So we started using that in a Japanese rice lager we do in a foeder. It's just that like continued idea that like there's lots of breweries that are doing amazing beers to style. We can try something else though. We can do something different in a fun, more thoughtful way.
Sure. Well, and as a chef, you're constantly being stimulated, or as someone with that chef background, you're constantly being stimulated by these ingredients, and it sparks new ideas and new ways you can do things. Speaking of that, are there any say out of the box ingredients that you've come across over the last year that that have sparked new ideas for beers, or across whatever style that might be?
Yeah, I mean, we've been messing around with cereal a lot. So not like not kids cereal, not like Fruit Loops, but just straight up the most boring cornflake cereal you can get. We've been using that in some stouts, in some Smooj products. We like it. It does add to body, and and it's
cornflakes, just cornflake cereal.
Yeah. Or at least perception about vanilla in my mind is kind of like that too. Like vanilla doesn't make a thing thicker, but the association of vanilla, like from everything you've ever, ice cream or whatever like that is kind of built into people's minds. It feels more full when you're using that ingredient. And then just a very nice toasty flavor. I'm a big fan of like just toastiness. So we try to toastiness that doesn't get, that doesn't border on like a malty beer, like something that's light and fun, but also toasty is like my sweet spot. So we started using cereal a lot for that. And then just like experimenting with every fruit we can possibly get our hands on,
Sure.
And some of them are really gross and some of them are really fun. But we definitely a lot of fruit, and I think cereal has probably been the thing we've been messing around with the most recently.
How do you use cereal in that sense? Or is this just cold side, kind of thing, or are you
mostly cold side? I think you're going to lose the nuance through fermentation. It just kicks out, or brewing, it just kicks a lot of the flavor out.
So post fermentation conditioning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then like to hit any kind of threshold, like how much cornflake cereal
it's dependent on the product,
I'm laughing at myself when I ask that question because it's so absurd. How much cornflakes do you need to add to reach a sensory threshold?
When you guys started this podcast,
is that what beer is today? But here we are.
And it's that's another culinary thing. I think those are the things the tangible things that I can really latch on to is the more yeast fermentation stuff. I can appreciate the flavor and understand it when we try it, but I'm trusting our people who understand it better and can conceptualize it better to help make those decisions. I really like the stuff you can see, hold, and taste immediately. It's just like the chefy side, I think. So the amount of cereal really depends on the product. Obviously, it's a stout, it's substantially more. If it's a base seltzer, it's less. If it's a kettle sour, it's less. It's just it's all dependent on the product.
Yeah. Although that sounds like a great ingredient to use if your goal is to lower your yields. So congratulations on that.
It definitely does that for sure. Our track record with absorption rate is not great. We definitely lose some stuff, but like it's at some point it's a marketing cost too. Like, I can get a bigger yield if I use less of an ingredient, but if I use more of that ingredient, it tastes more intense. It's more interesting. People enjoy it more. They're talking about it more with their friends. They're sharing it with their friends. And so there's part of that to consider too.
So let's pull out and look at the big picture now. What's in the future for Holmes and Smooj? What's the near term of the next year, and what's Smooj and Holmes going to look like 5 years from now for you all?
Yeah. So originally we opened with the brew pub. We bought a space about 1.5 miles away within 4 months of opening because it was just like we can't keep up in this location. So that second location became Holmes Campus. It's a property with 3 buildings on it, the biggest building being the production facility. We've got another building with our sister company, Dozer Coffee Roaster. And then there's a Holmes and Smooj tasting room in there as well, event space. So that opened in December. Both Holmes and Smooj are made out of the same building right now. We're getting closer and closer to opening the property next door to that facility for just Smooj production. So at some point, hopefully, fingers crossed, in the next 2 months here, those products are being made in separate buildings. We've had staff that we separately hired that have been working together for 2 years now. They're going to separate and work at each facility. And we're going to continue to grow Smooj, Holmes. I think we're very open to what we can do in the future, whether it be more locations. There's no plans for that quite yet. We're just trying to get settled into our normal location, but expand the mixed culture sour program, expand, the stout program. We brought on Paulie Gedeke. He was previously at Microphone, and then before that at Jay Wakefield. We brought him on to help us with our stout program. So we're looking to expand that. Casey Brockett is one of our employees that we promoted up to own the mixed culture sour program. So she's really hit the ground running, working on that. So there's little projects with different staff that we want to be able to expand once we separate the two and give. Because right now, as you can imagine, making 2 pretty different products in the exact same building, all the pumps are tied up, all the hoses are being used. They're running the canning line while you're trying to run a CIP. People are tripping over each other. Like everybody is very ready to have separate spaces at this point, kind of get our bearings. But I think the Smooj program we'll probably open a few more states next year, continue to grow that and do really fun and exciting stuff with that. And homes really continue to dial in all the different things that we're doing between lager, stout, mixed culture sour, hoppy, and all that stuff.
Well, that seems like a fantastic place to bring this to a close. G&D stands above the rest as the only chiller manufacturer that engineers your glycol piping for free. Fill like a pro with ProFill can fillers from ProBrew. Think outside the puree box with Old Orchard's craft concentrate blends. Looking for a good lager yeast? Try dry lager yeasts from Fermentis. If you're in the market for a new brewing podcast, check out the Brew Deck podcast from Country Malt Group. An arrived mobile point of sale powers places with personality. Of course, as always, your magazine subscription directly supports our ability to bring you this podcast each week. Go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button, let us know this content matters, and become a part of our team. And then, of course, you can go back into the archives of everything that we've done and go check all of that back content out as well, all included with your subscription. Nick, if people want to learn more about Smooj, they want to learn more about Holmes, the beers and the hard seltzers that you all make, where do they find you all?
On Instagram, we're at Holmes Brewery. Is that what we're talking about? Instagram? Or social media?
Wherever you want. Out there on the interwebs, in real life, you call it.
We'll cover it all. So at Holmes Brewery on Instagram and at Drink Smooj on Instagram for Smooj. And come check us out in Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor's a super fun town to come visit, really close to Detroit as well. We've got 2 locations, both with food and coffee and Smooj and beer and frosty Smooj and mixed drinks and cocktails and everything you could ever want. So they're a good time to come and visit, especially in the summer. We have a bunch of outdoor seating.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining me on the podcast. It's been fascinating and wonderful to talk about how you all brew or make Smooj. It's not really brewed, but it's produced. Kind of, yeah. How you all make this fantastic craft smoothie hard seltzer beverage that you have called Smooj. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. Cheers.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.